So, Nelson, let's start talking about consulting and entrepreneurship, two of your favorite topics in the world. What differences have you observed in both of these worlds between the Latin American ways of doing business and the UK way of doing business, specifically in consulting and entrepreneurship?
That was primarily my international business essay. It's very peculiar. I haven't worked in Brazil, so I don't know exactly how working in Brazil in consulting or doing any entrepreneurship there is. All I know is like from observing and from dealing with people and businesses, and from hearing my friends that work on those spheres talk about. Entrepreneurship, especially in Brazil, is way more bureaucratic. So like there are many more hoops to jump across in order to launch a company and keep the company growing. Labor laws in Brazil are also very strong. So like there are more obstacles to entrepreneurship in comparison to the UK, which in turn has more obstacles to entrepreneurship than a few other countries. So nothing is absolute. So that's one thing. The entrepreneurial spirit in Brazil is very big and very it's part of our culture to be entrepreneurial and to find solutions.
Is that part of developing economy narrative around the world, do you think, or is there something different about the Latin American?
I would say a bit of both. And not only Latin American, Brazil especially, being colonized by Portugal and having that rather...
You can say it.
I'm thinking of the nice way to say it.
YouTube will censor you if it doesn't like it.
Law. So Portugal had a very exploitative way of colonization. So that gives that implements an opportunistic mindset in the colony, just like as it is for the colonizers. So I would say that is like part of our DNA in Brazil, to try to find opportunities in things and to try to find creative solutions in things. That can obviously be towards the wrong directions and to bad outcomes, but it can also be like to proactive and innovative and good outcomes and solutions. Even though we have a higher power distance and a large inequality in the country, we also do believe that like you can jump up the chain. There's more of I feel like there's more of an ambition to be innovative and be successful and improve your life quality over time than in the UK, especially because like so many people do so bad, and that's very visible. You see poverty, you see misery around the city. So you do have that feeling that like you need to ascend at all costs. Whereas in the UK is much more comfortable not to do so. So I would say that the entrepreneurial mindset in Brazil is very strong. And the UK is also very strong for different reasons, more because like people feel empowered, especially by the institutions and the government and history, to be entrepreneurial and innovative. So that's that. In terms of consulting, I would say that it's more similar. The UK is becoming more and more casual around like working behaviors and dealing with clients and everything. Brazil at times is casual, at times is very formal. Now is also like going more to a casual approach to most things. What I would say though is that Brazil has a firmer protocol of client servicing and of servicing in general. So you will normally see like a more structured approach to relationships, whereas in the UK that's a bit more flexible and fluid. Not that one is better than the other, just differences in general, and not that it reflects in the quality of the output necessarily.
Yeah. Going back to what you said about the entrepreneurship culture in Latin America, do you think that the history imbibes a feeling of rebelliousness in general, and that influences the culture?
I believe so, absolutely. And not just rebelliousness against like colonizers, that was like 500, 400, 300 years ago. But also in terms of like the status quo, corrupt governments, very aggressive military dictatorships across Latin America just last century. And so all of that creates like this instinct of being a rebel and trying to change things, trying to change the status quo, trying to create new solutions. And also of more individualism at times. So like try to do better yourself, try to create something that helps you do better, that helps you ascend, that helps you get more security in society. So I think that all of that plays a role.
Now, moving into consulting, you often speak about your views on consulting quite openly, which is great for all of us. But what are your thoughts about careers in consulting?
So I do tailor my communications around consulting depending on my audience. Audience usually on an individual level. So pretty much like to demystify consulting. Consulting is like this big black box that is very idolized and everybody wants to be part of it, but nobody really understands it. And it's very difficult to understand it until you're thrown in it. The organizational structure of consulting is very different than all other companies in the industry, even in other professional services companies like media agencies or agencies in general. But people don't really realize it or understand it. So that's one thing to consider, especially when demystifying consultancy. I think that consulting is an amazing career. If not a career, is an amazing experience that any person can benefit from. Any person wanting to work in management or in any field of management can benefit from. A couple of years in consulting will probably give you exposure to different teams, different concepts, different clients, different challenges that you would otherwise. It's very, very dynamic. Some projects in some companies do tend to last like a year or more, but that's usually the exception to the rule. So, and there are always ways to roll off and go into a different project if you so wish. So I think that no other career path can give you that exposure. It's just a matter of is that the right career path after an MBA? Because even though it's gonna give you a lot of experience, probably you will need to roll down the staircase of your career to get into an MBA entry position within consulting. You will need to learn everything from scratch, and it might result in a lot of frustration that is not necessary.
By roll down, you mean take a pay cut potentially?
Take a pay cut, take a seniority cut.
Okay, yeah.
Most people doing an MBA were already relatively high on hierarchies in their companies. Going into consulting, they will go back to a lower stage, which is not a problem. That's a little bit of what I did when I moved from agencies to consulting. I was very conscious of it. The feeling that I get is that most MBAs will not realize. And also what I see is that many people, they want to join consulting just for a bit of experience, but not as a long-term career path, which is valid. But many people within the subgroup just want to do it as a stepping stone right out of the MBA. I don't think that that's a good solution, especially after many of us have already been working so long and have so many experience and are already doing the MBA, which gives a great stamp on the CV. Why collect just another stamp on the CV and sacrifice a couple of years of your life before you do what you actually want to do? So I think it's a matter of do you actually want to do consulting for everything that it gives you, or are you just looking for a stepping stone right after the MBA? So I think that that's one thing that people should think about before making the decision. It's very easy to feel peer pressured and go with the stampede of just applying for consulting just because everybody else on your MBA cohort is doing it. But I really don't think that that's the right approach.
Yeah. That brings me to my next question. People often talk about how consulting and entrepreneurship are related career strategies. You hear this from the same people saying, yeah, I want to have my own company, but I also am going to become a consultant. And maybe 2 to 3 years later, because that's the career span of a consultant, this is the assumption, or at least what people talk about, I'm going to have my own firm and I'm going to be a big founder of a large company and be successful. Is that what people in consulting really end up doing?
Yes and no. You do see it, but it's not as often as you would think, I would say. Consulting is a career path like any other. And within it, there will be people that will spin off to do their own thing. Consulting, however, does give you probably broader experience than other career paths to wider networks, more organizations that you'll be working with in terms of clients and partners, and of more concepts and problems that will be helpful in entrepreneurship. But that being said, it doesn't prepare you for entrepreneurship. It doesn't give you like a direct route into entrepreneurship. It's just like a career like any other in that regards. And people do spin out to create their own businesses. I've seen a few successful ones. I've seen some that didn't go very far, but it's rather a minority of the population rather than the majority. Sometimes I see senior people in consulting trying to establish a business as well, but often it's very hubristically done so. So pretty much like they think that like since they're a partner or a director in consulting, they can create a business and they'll probably be successful because they understand the game. But it's very different when you understand the game from a service provider. Yeah, and then when you actually need to put skin in the game and build something of yourself and take that to the market. So I think that that's something to consider. Consultants are professionals like any other. It doesn't make them any better or any worse, or it doesn't make them gods of the network and the industries that they work in. So it's just something to consider.
If you were to list like the top thing that you think consultants or being in a consulting career will give you, what is that number one thing, and what is the number one thing you think you're sacrificing in return?
Exposure is the number one thing. Exposure to people, exposure to different clients, exposure to different concepts, exposure to different organizational problems. Even if you're a specialist like I was in digital marketing, still got exposure to problems like in many different areas of the organization.
Broad exposure. Very
broad exposure. Also intersection between teams within organizations. And then you see also like trends and repeatability of problems. And pretty much like pitfalls that you can avoid if you're going into entrepreneurship, for example, or in any other career path that you may pursue after consulting, if that's what you wish. So exposure will be the number one. Also flexibility and autonomy. That will probably be like the number two. So if you like flexibility and autonomy in your job, that's the career path to be in, because in consulting usually like you're just an autonomous and you have a quite large degree of control on what you do in the firm, who you work with, what client you work with, what you want to explore, when you want to develop in terms of skill sets, etc. Many of the consulting firms are going to give you space for that. So those are probably like the greatest advantages in consulting in general. The downside is pretty much like it's probably like across the same, like as a flip side of the coin on the same tokens, the coins and the tokens. So it's pretty much like you get exposure to so many things that like it's a bit difficult to become a specialist in anything or to know anything very in depth. You become a very proficient person in business relationships, but you don't necessarily know anything, any subject matter in a lot of depth. Consulting does give you space to develop that, but it's a bit counter flux in the consulting career path. And the other thing is like the too much autonomy and a little bit of like a feeling of loneliness or of lack of support. So in most cases, you do have a support network, but at the end, you're too responsible for your career. So it's not like you have a direct line manager in most cases outside of the project's work. And it becomes a bit difficult and it becomes a bit like very political and very brandy in that like you need to speak up for the work that you did, because like there are so many teams doing so many things that like not everybody responsible for your career and your success in the company have visibility on the work that you've actually done. So it becomes a lot about smoke and mirrors internally. as well.
Yeah, and think about all of the people that come to do an MBA to become an entrepreneur or gain some more skills to become an entrepreneur. Maybe they're coming from a technical background and they've never done, business hands-on with full skin in the game, and that's something they want to do and they feel like, let me do an MBA. A lot of them end up converting into consulting. I've met a lot of people who said, I'm going to have my own company after the MBA, and then they change and go back into consulting for 2 to 3 years, for example, and they're trying to build up some cash base and go and spend it on their startup ideally. Do you think that is a good strategy for the entrepreneurs? We both care about entrepreneurship, and I'm assuming we both care about founders in general, the people that keep this the world exciting. Is that the best thing they could do after an MBA, or is there anything better they could have done?
I'm not sure. So a career path that focuses and fosters your skill set, your technical skill set. For example, I worked at Deloitte Digital. Deloitte Digital had a huge part of developers and programmers that would still be doing that and would be valued for that. It's just like different environment. They would be working in different consulting projects doing that. So that's great, and it will give them exposures of being part of a bigger team that deals with like client problems outside of programming, bigger than programming. So it does give them exposure to those wider skills. So I think that that's great if they want to leverage that skill set, but not necessarily in terms of valuing that technical background in terms of their career path. If they go to a more generalist typical management consulting type of role, then they pretty much it's more of a reset decision. So I think that that's something that people should keep in mind. And that goes back to what I was saying about doing consulting as a stepping stone to something else. I don't think that that's necessarily a great idea, especially for people that come to do an MBA with average of 6 years of experience, probably brilliant career experience to be joining these institutions. So it's a matter of do you really want to erase lots of that and join consulting? Or would you rather just go to the next thing that you want to do, say entrepreneurship, straight away?
And in your eyes, what is the job of a CEO? If this is what they're going into consulting to learn to do better, be a CEO tomorrow, what do you think a real CEO, regardless of whether they had a career in consulting or not, should know?
I think that most things are surprisingly taught on the MBA. It's just a matter that people should keep their eyes open and be accepted to what is being taught, and also defensive and just fighting back on everything that is being taught as if it's common sense or something else. Obviously, some things are not gonna align directly with everyone, but I think that most skills on the knowledge side, not on an experience side, on how to be a CEO and how to be a good leader are taught in the MBA in different ways. I don't think there will be anything extra to learn from consulting, except from putting all those skills in higher complexity and higher dynamism and in direct experience.